So when it comes to D&D, I see a lot of discussion on the internet about the Wizards of the Coast rulebooks and the rules as written. There are plenty of rules that my players and I both agree should be changed or removed, and in my humble opinion, it's resulted in a much better D&D game. Today, I'll be sharing with you my top 5 house rules that personally I think you should be trying out in your D&D 5th edition campaign. Now, I've personally playtested all of these house rules, and they've kind of become a staple in all of my D&D 5e campaigns. So with that said, let's begin. So the first house rule is group initiative. Somewhere. Here's how it works. This system gets all of your players actively focused on what's happening and helps build a team mentality. Once combat is inevitable, you, the GM, and the player who triggered the event both roll a d20. No modifiers, the highest number goes first. On the player's turn, everyone declares their actions, their movement, their bonus actions, and just does that going around the table until it's the GM's turn to run the monsters or the baddies. And that's basically it. It's pretty efficient. Now, you can argue that this effectively weakens the dexterity ability score stat, but let's be real, it's already pretty strong. Dexterity as an ability score already has a lot going for it, and I don't think this really takes away from its significance as a stat. Also, dex saves are significantly more common than like strength or int saves, and dex even weighs heavily on your armor class, so it's okay if you tack off the initiative aspect of it. One last thing, if a player were to take a feat like Alert or gains a class ability like the Gloomstalker's Dread Ambusher ability, as the GM, I would just have that conversation with my players and probably come up with some sort of agreement as to how much of a bonus they should get from that ability. Ultimately, this rule really helps speed up combat, and my players are much more actively focused when it's their turn because the order can kind of shift around depending on who speaks up first. All right, the next rule is resting. I see this all over YouTube. This is a really hotly debated topic on the internet, especially because everyone feels as though the Dungeon Master's Guide kind of gives you this gauge of what a challenge rating is, and they're focusing that based off of how the resting mechanics work. Now, the resting mechanics do have some flaws. I've seen countless videos online of people essentially making fun of how you can simply just take a long rest en route to your next destination and fully recover mortal wounds or injuries along the way. It also doesn't help that you're recovering your spells and your hit dice and all of these things that make you essentially a god. This effect is compounded by the fact that you also recover your spells and abilities just for sleeping off the side of the road. And as I stated, this system was designed because the Dungeon Master's Guide expects you to have 6 to 8 encounters per adventuring day. 6 to 8 encounters per adventuring day. That number seems really high to me, and it certainly isn't the reality when you're actually playing the game. So your game will simply just become less challenging if you're always letting your players go Nova and then rest in between each of those encounters. Now, the Dungeon Master's Guide, of course, has a lot of gritty variant mechanics that you can implement to allow for long rests to be a bit more difficult. One, for example, is allowing your players to only take a long rest, and that long rest has to last for an entire week in a town or something along those lines. But I think that's a bit too much skewed in the direction of making it very difficult to have that long rest. Here's my solution and how I do resting in my game. In order for a PC to gain the benefits of a long rest, they must be in a safe place, such as a village, a town, or a city, or some other fortified and protected area. They can't just simply sleep on the side of the road and recover to full HP and half their hit dice. This puts a more significant importance on hit dice resource management and gets them closer to that 6 to 8 encounters per long rest the original system was designed for. So this rule has completely fixed the pacing of my campaign and has actually made encounters be a thought process for my players, where they're like, yeah, we can just go and fight this particular encounter, but we don't know how many more of these encounters we're going to have before the next opportunity for a long rest. Dang, should I tell you guys that? Okay, so I've considered an alternative hardcore mode rule where your HP doesn't recover at all when you finish a long rest. The only way to get your HP back is by spending those hit dice and then adding your con mod to them. There's a couple things that this would change within your game, and I'm writing up a rule set that will allow to accommodate for that change. Let me know in the comments down below if you want to see that, and if you want to see a whole list of all my house rules and like a nice easy to read Google Doc. Now, before I move on to the next one, it's critically important that you have open dialogue with your players when you're trying to incorporate a house rule to your game. I also highly recommend that you don't change your rules mid-campaign with your players. I've done this. They're not always happy about it, but if you have a really cool group of players and they're all really good at chatting about how they feel about the game and they're open for that communication, then I say go for it. So be sure to check in with your players and make adjustments as you see fit. All right, next rule, player facing combat. This rule is gonna kind of blow your mind. Now, I first learned about this rule from watching one of the professor's videos over at Dungeon Graft. Dungeon Graft. Oh god. So you can click on the card and check out his channel. Super knowledgeable guy. Shout out to him. And I'm certainly a fan of any sort of system that allows my players to roll more dice. This also has the added benefit of making your players stay more actively involved in combat. So the first thing you need to do is you need to convert your player character's armor class into their armor class modifier. To do this, you take your player's armor class and you subtract 10 from it. Whatever the difference is, that is their armor class modifier. Do that step first. It makes everything else make much more sense. Then when your player is attacked in combat, the player is going to roll a d20 and they're going to add their armor class modifier to their roll. Kind of like if they were making a saving throw of some kind. And the way I describe this to my players in combat is that you're trying to avoid or block the attack or have your armor absorb the hit. Just because we all love examples here, say a PC has an 18 armor class because they're wearing plate mail armor. So we subtract 10 from that, 18 minus 10 is 8, so their armor class modifier is a plus 8. The second thing you need to do is you need to understand how to convert a monster's attack bonus into a monster's attack DC or difficulty class. Now to do this, when you're looking at a monster stat block in the monster's manual, for example, look at the creature's attack bonus to hit, and whatever that number says, you add 12 to it. Why 12, you ask? There's something to do with the math. I barely got through calculus in college. I can't tell you exactly why. Makes sense in my game so far. Now, the way this works is if a player's AC roll, we're going to call that last number, AC roll a d20, add your armor class modifier to it, that's your AC roll. If that roll meets or beats the creature's attack DC, the attack misses. If the PC rolls a natural 1, that's a critical hit. If the PC rolls a natural 20, then they completely deter the attack. Now, this is one of the newer house rules I've incorporated into my games, and my players freaking love it. It also has the added benefit of freeing up my brain for better combat descriptions and, of course, really cool flair. Number 2, now this one has been a rule at my table for a very long time, but basically it's improved critical hits. Now, there's really nothing worse than scoring a critical hit and you get that excitement from rolling your natural 20, and then you roll a 1, and then you roll another 1. It just feels, it sucks. You got a natural 20. You should be freaking doing some cool shit. Come on. It should feel epic and significant, and then it isn't. So in my game, if you score a critical hit, you roll that damage dice twice, but you don't actually roll the second set of dice. It's just automatically maxed out. I'll go into a little bit more detail here. So if I roll to attack and I get a natural 20, roll to attack, boom, I got a natural 20. Now, I'm gonna roll a d10 for my longsword that I'm wielding with 2 hands. Because it's a crit, I get a second d10 to roll, but instead of me rolling it, it's just auto-magically a 10. And then of course we add modifiers after that. Try it, you're welcome. Oh, and one final note on this. Just remember that this house rule also applies to monster attacks. All right, number 1, in the last rule, bonus action potions. This one is used by so many people, but no one really talks about it in videos I've noticed. My PCs spend a lot of their downtime activities being in taverns. I'm certain their characters can drink 2 to 4 ounces of liquid fairly quickly. In addition to that, healing potions are pretty common in my game. So basically this rule just allows you to drink a potion yourself as a bonus action. This easy change also just makes combat a bit more dynamic by giving your players a little bit more action economy on what they can do on their turns. The one caveat, however, is pouring a potion into an unconscious party member's mouth. That still does require an action because they're unconscious, they're very likely prone, and there's a couple other steps you have to do, like popping the cork and then opening their mouth and making sure that they're actually able to drink the potion laying prone on the ground. Try it with your friends at home and let me know how that goes. I don't think this house rule breaks the game in any way, and I encourage you to try it out at your table. And those are my top 5 house rules that I recommend you try out in your game, but I do have one more honorable mention that I am going to throw out here as well. Remove dark vision. There are too many races and ancestries that have dark vision, and it kind of takes away from that quasi OSR feel where torches and lanterns were actually an important aspect. Also, Dungeon Craft and XP to level 3 both made videos about this, talking about how most people do dark vision wrong in their games. And that's a huge point because for a while, I also was like, wait, isn't there a rule about dark vision? You can't just see in the dark. You're seeing in shades of gray and like vague images. Dark vision, get rid of that. Should be gone. Be gone, spawn of darkness. Be gone! Now, before you go, just remember, house rules are just house rules. You can use all, some, or none, and they're really just meant to enhance your game experience and make it more fun. I can't tell you how many times I've talked with my players about incorporating a house rule, and then we all agree to try it, and then we do it for a couple sessions, and then afterwards we're like, yeah, that rule kind of sucks. We don't really want to do that anymore. So we just scrap it completely, and that's totally fine. What's important, though, is to pay attention to that rule when it comes up, and then think about this really important question. Does this house rule enhance your game experience? If it doesn't enhance it, get rid of it. Don't waste your time with that nonsense. Now, if you plan on utilizing any of these house rules in your campaign, or if you do, please let me know down in the comments below. Also, if you found this video helpful, please roll to hit on that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps me grow my channel, and I'm trying to get to my first 1,000 subs, so tell your friends and your family and your dog or cat's YouTube profile, go subscribe. I think that's not allowed. I think it's probably fine. Thank you so much for watching. Happy to help, and I'll see you all in the next one. I think that's good.